Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another tier list video, where today we are covering the various starter sets that have come out in Warhammer's long and storied history. The first starter set for Warhammer came out in 2nd edition, so we're going to start there, of course, and then go through each edition, and put them on a tier list, how they relate to each other. Now, a few things before we get started is most of these starter sets, with a couple exceptions, have been all about the same price. Adjusting for inflation, they're in today's money. They're all about 65 to 67 pounds. The reason I'm using pounds is just because Warhammer prices are really only accurately cataloged in Great British pounds, so that's the easiest thing I have access to cross-reference for historical prices. And most of these, fall into that price point of 65 to 68 pounds in today's money, which you'd kind of just need to add on the usual sort of American tax for collecting a Warhammer and the conversion, and you'll see that, most of them are about the same price. So first up, we have the one from 2nd edition. So this was a very big box. It really set off the Warhammer wave of the 90s, and it's a pretty solid box. What it includes is 80 minis, or 81 minis actually. So it does hold the title of the most minis in a starter box. We're not including like Leviathan and Indominus because those aren't really starter boxes. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so 81 minis. It included 20 Orc Boys, 20 Space Marines, Tactical Marines, 40 Gretchen, and a cardstock picture of a Orc Dreadnought that's slotted into a base. This also included almost a full table's worth, if I'm not mistaken, of cardboard terrain that you would just fold out, which, interestingly enough, made a return with the most recent Kill Team starter box, and I really want to see that kind of terrain come back in style in 11th edition of Warhammer 40k. As I was saying, so it comes with the fold-out terrain, 81 minis, really 80 and then one plastic one. I will say that there isn't, I think in total there's only 5 different maybe 6 different minis in this, because all the Orc Boys are the same, all the Gretchen are the same. You have a rocket launcher and a flamer in both squads, so that brings us up to 4, and then a sergeant in each squad, and then the bolter guy. So there's in truth only 6 minis in here, just repeated endlessly, basically. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It gave you a large force of both of them. This would have been probably around, 600, not 600, probably closer to 400 to 500 points of each of them at the time, with their equipment added on. And these models are all solid. They're, of course, plastic monopose minis from the 90s, but they're still solid models. And I think just for, what it represents, it's the first one. It really laid the groundwork. I think I'm going to put it in S tier, if only on historical importance. And also, you just got a lot of minis, which was nice, and a bunch of terrain. That's something that a few of the next ones really struggled with, which we'll definitely be docking points from. Next up, we have the 3rd edition starter set. Now, this, of course, included 2 ruins, a couple trees, and some tank traps. And then it included 20 Cabalite warriors, 10 Space Marines, and a land speeder. So this is obviously a huge step down in terms of model count. And also, strangely, the model variety also sort of stayed the same, because the Cabalite warriors are all the same thing, basically. I think you got a splinter cannon in each squad, though. I will say, I'm not the biggest fan of this starter set. With starter sets, of course, a lot of people's favorites will just be whichever one was in the edition they started, but I'm trying to look at it from more than just that. Of course, though, nostalgia will play a part in some of it. But I just don't think this is the most interesting box. Not only is it lacking in models, being one of the lowest model count ones at only, what would that be, 31 models, excluding the terrain. The models it does include are fairly so-so. Just tactical marines with, I believe, a flamer and a rocket launcher. And then it was just 20 Cabalites and a land speeder. The terrain, I also don't think is very good. It doesn't include a lot of it. I suppose if you were playing on a really tight board, it would still do the job very well. But it doesn't offer a lot of cover or anything. And also, in terms of learning the game, basically you have just all shooting units, while tactical marines could fight in melee. I use that very, very loosely. Their initiative was okay, which meant they were fine enough to fight at the time. But against Dark Eldar, I think they had less initiative. And so you really just didn't have the greatest variety of learning the different facets of the game, though the inclusion of the land speeder is nice to learn how vehicles work. Overall, though, I think I'm probably going to give it a C tier. I just don't think it's very good. However, it is better, in my opinion, than the Battle from a Crag. So Battle from a Crag is kind of like all the worst parts of the 3rd edition set, but like cranked to 11. It includes a lot of big pieces of terrain, but they're all pretty flat, so you don't really get, line of sight blocking. You don't get a lot of great cover. You don't get that many minis. You get 10 Space Marines, 10 Termagants, 8 Gene Stealers, and 5 Spore Mines, which I think just barely puts it above the last one, but I think the last one was probably a slightly better model. Well, not better, because you got more variety here, which was good. It did include the little Imperial Pilot Mini, which was effectively just an objective marker for some of the starter missions. But yeah, I don't think this is one of the better sets, all things considered. Mainly just because I feel like there wouldn't be a lot of variety in how these games would play out. At the time, bolters were their Strength 4, AP 5 incarnation, which meant they were really good at killing things like Termagants and maybe not necessarily Gene Stealers, but with 2 squads focusing fire, I'm sure those Gene Stealers would wither pretty fast. So I feel like it lacked a variety of units. The terrain it included wasn't very useful, and it doesn't include that many minis, which is the main thing I'd want in a starter set, honestly. So I'm going to put this one just below the last one, just because they're very similar, but I like the terrain more in the 3rd edition set than the 4th edition set, which is the big decider. Next up, we're going back to a super positive note, Assault on Blackreach. So Assault on Blackreach is one that's very important to me personally. I still have, I believe, all the orcs from this box except the war boss. I think I threw him out, which was very dumb. But I was a kid. But the thing is, my eldest brother, when I went out to visit him, he gave me the orc side of this box set, and that really allowed me to have like an actual orc army, which was really cool. And also, I think this set is one of the best ways to do monopose, because I'm looking at the knobs, one of the knobs from this box set that's right on my table, and the way they did it was basically everything used the same peg system. So you could put any of the heads on any of the bodies and any of the arms on any of the corresponding bodies, whether it be a Choppa or a Shuda arm. And it would allow you to just shift things up a little bit. So it wasn't just purely what you saw in the box art was what you got. You could change things up a little bit. And also the models from this era are generally pretty good. This was, around 2008? I will say some of the base sizes are a little odd, like knobs on 25mm is really sad, especially because this is where Terminators moved to 40mm bases, and I wish they would have bumped knobs up to a bigger base size. But in terms of minis, it's a pretty solid amount. It's, 46 if I'm not mistaken. This is the where the modern design of Defcopt is generated from. And it, of course, just included a lot of models. 20 Orc Boys, 5 Knobs, a War Boss, 3 Defcoptas, and then you got 10 Space Marines, a Captain, 5 Terminators, and a Dreadnought. Really just like the perfect spread that you could really ask for in a starter set for both of these armies. And it also included a good variety of things to teach you all the facets of the game, which is why I think Blackreach is looked back upon rather fondly. You had flying things with the Defcoptas. You had a vehicle with the Dreadnought, which also had the Melta weapon, which let you learn the Melta rules. You had the choppy Orc Boys and Knobs for your melee. Then you had the and also Terminators, of course, with their power fists. And then you had a more shooty unit like the Tactical Squad, and you also had the Captain and War Boss to learn about character rules. It's just a fantastic box set the whole way around. It did. This is sort of where terrain stopped being a major part of them, which honestly I'm fine with. I would rather them include more minis, which they very evidently did here, and just tell people to use, boxes and glasses and bottles from around their house as terrain, because, truth be told, that's what most people start out with, at least from when I got into the hobby. And it works just as well as some plastic bits of terrain. Overall, absolutely fantastic, right up there with the first starter set. Funnily enough, it's also when the Orcs returned to the starter set, and while that may seem like bias, I swear to you it's not. It's just that these starter sets are better than the last two. Next up we have Dark Vengeance, which was the starter set for the very ill-fated 6th edition, which to this day is by far the shortest edition of Warhammer, only lasting a year and 9 months. This set served as that launch box, and then the starter set rather for 6th, and then it was just carried over to 7th, since 7th was just kind of fixing the absolute mess that 6th edition was. And it's not a favorite of mine, which you may think is weird because, I love Dark Angels, but I just don't think it makes sense to include chapter-specific Space Marines in a starter box. This included 3 Ravenwing, but it was just a bike squad. It wasn't Black Knights, if I'm not mistaken. A unit of 5 Deathwing Terminators, a squad of tactical Marines with a plasma cannon and plasma gun, with Dark Angel stuff molded onto their shoulder pads, and then a captain and, for a limited time, a chaplain as well. I just don't particularly like the idea of including chapter-specific things. It just makes the set less appealing to more people, and also it's not a great place to start out because it also sort of railroads you into just doing one paint scheme. I do have some of the Dark Vengeance Marines in my collection, but I went through quite a lot of effort to remove their Dark Angels iconography because I would rather just not have to deal with that. And then on the Chaos side, it's a bit better. You got 20 Cultists, which is a little heavy on the Cult side, and then you got 5 Chosen, which were sort of the genesis of the modern day Chaos Space Marine design language, which also was with the Raptors, who came out around here, the Forge Fiend. Of course, this was the introduction of Hellbrutes and the mourned loss of Chaos Dreadnoughts. The Chaos side, I think, is fine, though a little light on actual Marines. And the Dark Angel side, I'm not a big fan of it being specifically Dark Angels. If this was just generic Marines versus generic Chaos Marines, I think it would be much better. Also, I think it is a bit of a weird choice to have Marines versus Marines, because it's effectively, especially at this point, there was very little delineation between the two types of Marines, rules-wise, outside of, like Possessed and things like that. So just overall, not a great starter set. I don't think it's as bad, or as mediocre, I should say, as 3rd and 4th editions, but it's probably going to end up at the bottom of B tier. I also don't like that they did a limited edition model run with this. If you got one of the first waves of these, you got that chaplain. I much prefer how they do it nowadays, where if you order something early, you usually get something like a game board or tokens, objective markers, useful stuff like that. Next up, we're on to 8th edition, and 8th edition also introduced the idea of 2 levels of starter sets. This is also one of our first starter sets that really deviates price-wise, with Dark Imperium being a good bit more expensive than the previous ones, but then No Fear being a little bit on the cheaper side, around 45 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. I think both of these sets, though, are rather good. While it does do the Marine versus Marine, I think the Plague Marines look different enough that it does help delineate them. Also, not specific to any Plague Legion. And No Fear is just effectively the same thing with a lot of the extra models removed. You still got your you got your Captain, Lord of Contagion. You got your Plague Marines, but you didn't get the Malignant Plague Caster and the not the Tallyman, the other character that was included on the Death Guard side. You didn't get the Flesh Mower, Defeated Bloat Drone, rather. This is, of course, a rather monumental point in Warhammer's history, where Games Workshop decided that it was time to actually update how Warhammer was played, and move towards something a little different from third to 7th edition. But I think model-wise, it's pretty solid. I mean, I'm not the biggest Death Guard fan, but their models are nice, I will admit that. And this was also the genesis of Primaris Marines. We had Intercessors, Hellblasters, Inceptors, the Gravis Captain, the start of the Primaris Lieutenant meme. It had a lot of models. It had, 53 models in Dark Imperium. But it was also the death of the Red Whippy Sticks, which is certainly a blessing to people with legs, because if you've ever played with one of those, the losing player will 100% whip you with one of those Red Whippy Sticks. But overall, I think these are solid starter sets. I'm probably going to put No Fear right above... No, I'm going to put No Fear because this was the cheapest starter set at the time in Warhammer's history. And then I'm going to put Dark Imperium above Dark Vengeance, just because, again, Dark Vengeance, I don't like that they included specifically Dark Angel's things. I think that was very dumb. Next, we move on to ninth edition, which expanded on the multiple stage starter sets more, into splitting it into three, where you had your Recruit Edition, which was a fantastic box, one of the first things I got back into after I came out of my Warhammer Dark Age. And it was great. It gave me a taste of the new Space Marines. It gave me a taste of Necrons. That also really helped in solidifying my return to the hobby. So it gave me a lot to work on. I quite like the Lieutenant and the Royal Warden that they included. It really let me stretch my legs creatively. And it was super cheap. I think it was about the same price as Dark Imperium. Or not Dark Imperium, what am I saying? No Fear. If not a little bit cheaper. But it was just an absolutely fantastic box. I think a lot of people got into Warhammer with this box, and that's for good reason. It was a great box. It really teached you everything you needed to know with just a few units. You had shooting with your Necron warriors, you had melee with your assault intercessors, you had two kinds of buffing characters, and then you even got some little swarms with the scarabs, which let you sort of introduce the idea of like cheap chaff units, which is something that's very important in 40k. And then you had the, not command, I believe this was just called the starter set. I think the starter set was also fine, a little bit more expensive, but also you got different characters. You got a captain and an overlord. You got the destroyers on the Necron side, and bikers on the Space Marine side, which of course introduces a mightier melee unit, and biking sort of mountain rules, which are also important to learn since a lot of factions tend to have bikers, or equivalents for things like Tau Piranhas, for example. And I mean, this is also just a solid starter set. I also like the idea of using the box itself as terrain because A, it saves on having to include plastic terrain, which lets you include more models, and also it does the job just as well. It allows you to have some height, it allows you to break up line of sight so it doesn't favor one side too much over the other, and overall, just a solid starter set in my opinion. I'm going to put it right behind the Recruit Edition just because, I mean, the Recruit Edition was such a good deal. Next up, we have the Command Edition, which is the same as the starter set, but with a bunch of plastic terrain, which personally I don't see as the most valuable. It also included the full-fat rulebook with all the lore and stuff included. This was a good bit more expensive than the other two boxes, unsurprisingly. And I'm not sure if it was the best value, just because you didn't get any more models. You just got the terrain and the rulebook. Which, again, as I mentioned, I'd prefer if they just included more models and tell you to use boxes and stuff as terrain, because truth is, we all have boxes laying around, and even if we don't, books work just as well, But, I mean, it's still a fine starter set. The terrain looks nice. It's just, I think, in my mind, superfluous. I'm going to put it right behind Dark Imperium, personally. Next up, we have, we're on to 10th edition, the most recent edition of the game, and also having 3 sets. So this Recruit Edition, or Introductory Set as it's called, took a different approach to the cheapest line of Warhammer models, right? You still get, 2 squads and a little base of Rippers, but instead of including, like, a character and a rule book, well, it did include a rule book, I should say. It included the little, a slimmed-down rule book. But instead of including characters and terrain, it went the route of giving you everything you need to start playing Warhammer, because it includes 5 paints, the dice, snippers to get the things off their sprues, and then a paintbrush. And while it's not the nicest paintbrush, Warhammer starter set paintbrushes have never been particularly great. It would get the job done, especially for a newer painter where they are going to make mistakes. It's better to learn on a cheap brush than a more expensive one that you might ruin accidentally. And I mean, it's the same price as the Recruit set. So it's sort of a trade-off. Do you want the characters, or do you want the stuff you need to paint your models and also to assemble them, which was not included in the other starter sets. I think this starter set, though, is fine. It's not as good as, like, it's about the same tier as No Fear, in my opinion, in terms of how good it is for starting, though, of course, again, this is more slanted towards the hobby as a whole rather than just the rules themselves. Next up, we have the full starter set, which is fantastic. It includes a lot of models. It includes 20 Termagants, the Winged Tyranid Prime, the Von Ryan's Leapers, the Psychophage, so you get a monster. It includes your Infernus Marines, a Captain in Terminator armor, and some Terminators. I mean, it's a great starter set, pretty average price point. Similar to last editions, it uses, it just uses like the box as terrain, if you will. I think it's a solid starter set, though. Really fantastic. It gives you effectively a quarter of your army for each side, which is really good. Obviously, that's a great starting point. And overall, I think it is really solid. I'm going to put it right here next to the 9th edition starter set, just because I prefer the variety of units included in this box to the ones included in the last editions. And then finally, we have the Ultimate Starter Set, which includes Barb Gaunts and a Terminator Librarian, as well as a table of terrain for combat patrol-sized games. And the reason that I think this is a step up from the Command Edition, last edition, is because not only does it include the terrain, that's pretty simple terrain. It's barricades in a building, which is pretty much what you need. It gives you some height. It gives you the barricades to block line of sight. It's also modular, you can set it up how you want. It also includes the extra models, which is the main thing I criticized Command Edition for last time. And this gives you 2 combat patrols to play effectively full 40k. Just you have 2 armies done, you don't need to buy anything else. If you bought this, you could run, as many games as you want because you have absolutely everything you need. You have your measuring sticks, you have your dice, you have your terrain, you have your minis. And these are effectively fully fledged out armies because Combat Patrol includes basically all the mini things you need for an army. I think it's a fantastic starter set. It's a little pricier than the other ones, but that makes sense because you get a little bit more. And in terms of like raw discount, this is absolutely fantastic. Again, you're getting 2 Combat Patrols, which usually cost, $160 for the price of 1, so you're basically just getting 1 of them for free, if not a little bit discounted, because I think this is a little cheaper than that. But it's a fantastic starter set. I'm going to put it right up with the Recruit starter set from last edition. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, that just about wraps up my thoughts on the starter sets. I'm sure that this is going to be a bit of a decisive thing because I'm sure a lot of people that started in 3rd edition, they absolutely adore the 3rd edition starter set. A lot of people that started in 4th adore the 4th, and so on and so forth. But just, it's my opinions. What I think dictates good value for the price you pay. And I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.